What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Adam, here with coaches Tara and Damon today, fresh off the morning shift. We're going to get into shoulder joint health today. A few weeks back, we did a pod on some knee stuff. Similar, it's going to be a similar podcast today, but obviously focusing on the shoulder. Got into last time how we have a specified knee kind of rehab program that we started to integrate into our programming, and coming soon, going to do the same with the shoulder. So before we get into all that, we're going to go ahead, of course, do our client of the week. And this week we're going with Miss Jan Frank. So she, longtime member, actually just hit our Hall of Fame level. I believe it was probably 2 weeks ago at this point. But that is, for those who don't know, Hall of Fame is second highest tier as far as number of workouts logged, and I believe it's 500.
Yes.
Elite level status.
That's elite. 500 workout. That's more of a year's worth of workouts that she's put in here. So as far as following that lift ideology, integrating fitness into her lifestyle, she's here every day. She works hard, same hour every morning, and then she hangs out and does a bunch of her own mobility and stretching for, I don't know,
at least an hour.
It seems like an hour. It's a while, but she's absolutely locked in. Had a great in-body recently as well. You guys got any more on Jan?
She's just super mobile.
Super mobile.
I wish I could be that mobile.
It's pretty crazy to see. But that just shows, consistency, hard work. She's like very deliberate with how she does her routine, and it pays off really well for her. So congrats on that, Jan, Hall of Fame. All right. So opening up, we got the shoulder today. We're going to talk about how it's kind of a sucky joint, honestly. Let's just throw it out there right now. It's the most mobile joint in your body. So of course, we've got other joints. You got your ankles, which are right there. I would say right there behind it as far as mobility. You got your knees, which you talked about in a previous pod, and then it goes into your hips, and then part of your spine is actually considered a joint. And then we've got the shoulder. So common things, and why we're kind of getting into this today is not necessarily, I wouldn't even prescribe or diagnose them as shoulder injuries per se with a lot of people, but sometimes there's just kind of like that nagging, or some people will say there's like hear clicking, or if I try to do something up over my head, it's super difficult to get there because my traps, bro. My traps get super tight, all these things, and it's like this chain reaction, and there's like pinching. Yeah, again, there's like no range there. So we run into that for sure every day. There's a handful of people that talk about it, and it's kind of, we try to educate and inform them the difference between being injured and managing something and trying to improve something that could be like a weak area for you. If it's not actually causing you pain, it's not an injury. It's just something that you're dealing with, and there's things to work on. So we're going to kind of talk about how the shoulder works, how sometimes people injure it while they're actually lifting, and then how to kind of train for it so long term you don't run into those issues, down the line in everyday life. So a little bit on the shoulder itself. So technically, we refer to it as one joint. It's a couple of different joints together. So the glenohumeral joint common term would be ball and socket. So you've got, if you make a fist with one of your hands and use your other hand and kind of put a cap over it, that's essentially how the shoulder sits. It's just sitting ball in socket, exactly what it sounds like. That's the glenohumeral joint. And then the scapulothoracic articulation, we're getting scientific here, sorry about it. It's how your shoulder blades move. So there's a big correlation between proper shoulder blade movement and shoulder health. Shoulder blade, scapula, saying the same thing. Basically, if you look at somebody's back straight on, we see often that the scapulas travel vertically when they're trying to be engaged. They slide up and down, which is not really the movement that you are looking for. You actually want them to rotate and swing open and closed, almost like wings, if you could imagine that. So that's kind of just like the basis on the two different parts that we're looking at. We're looking at the ball and socket and then the relationship to the scapulas. So we're relying very, very heavily on muscles to essentially muscles and tissue to form the structure of the shoulder. And that's why it can be so sensitive and a hard joint to protect. So, Damon, you want to get into like some stabilizing muscles and things that, maybe people don't think of when they think of their shoulders, and, just more anatomy on that.
Right. So you have the primary stabilizers and then you have the secondary stabilizers. I usually like to think of the primary stabilizers as the local muscles, sometimes the muscles that you don't really think about. We actually have them in our program with the trigger points, with the supraspinatus for your primary stabilizers, as well as the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the subscapularis. Yeah. Those are the little muscles that we don't really think about in our day-to-day lives that keep the head of that joint and the humerus to stay in that socket, to be able to rotate through and go into that 360 motion. For the secondary stabilizers, those are your more common ones, such as your delts, your traps, your serratus anterior, and rhomboids. That's what helps keep everything connected and be able to press through heavy motions. And that would be the key difference between the two.
Yeah, and those, so you were talking about the primary stabilizers, commonly referred to as rotator cuff, right? You hear everybody like, I got a partial rotator cuff tear, my rotator is messed up. Those are your infraspinatus, supraspinatus, the teres, the subscap. Those all form, and sometimes I guess the teres major and minor, two different ones, sometimes thrown in there as a fifth, are your rotator cuff, commonly referred to. So that was a perfect breakdown. As far as why the scapular movement matters in relation to these primary and secondary stabilizing muscles, like we said, shoulder relies heavily on muscle and tissue. It also relies on tendons to keep everything moving properly. So when we have that bad or poor scap movement, that's where there's increased stress on these tendons and these muscles that are already so small and very hard to target to begin with, that even just repetitive movement, even if it's very light resistance, incorrect repetitive movement can affect the shoulder as a whole pretty greatly. And there's a lot of nerve endings and things up in your shoulder. So, it can, you can feel things shoot down your arm and stuff like that, because we had actually a member, Kathy, not going to drop the last name. She was dealing with a tendon issue, bicep tendon actually, in her shoulder that had basically jumped out of place, and was the whole time thinking that it was, shoulder related, because like locally that's where she was feeling her pain. But similarly to, she had her issue in the bicep tendon, which is close to the shoulder, it's just below it on the way to the bicep. She was getting that kind of ghost pain up in the shoulder because so many of the nerve endings in and around there are connected to each other. And like you were saying, Damon, all those different muscles that contribute, they're all packed in there. So something's out of place, something's not moving right, it could feel real bad. And that's why people talk about their shoulder pain. So, Tara, when people are here training, how do we see people basically get sometimes injured with the shoulders, or what can we do to either prevent these injuries or educate them on how to avoid in-session injuries?
As you mentioned, the shoulder is really held in place by those muscles and that connective tissue. So anything that's going to somehow impact any of those muscles, any of that connective tissue, will cause a problem. The most common exercise seen is anything overhead, just because that puts the shoulder in its most vulnerable position.
Yep.
So anything overhead, the biggest culprit, I would say, is lifting too heavy.
Yeah. Yep.
People are like, oh, it's just overhead. And it's like, wait, no. Overhead will be, if not the lightest lift you'll ever have will be an overhead lift.
Sure.
And I want to add on that too. The craziest thing that I see that some of our clients do, and they don't realize it, it's not their fault, but they'll be doing a RDL with, let's just say, 35-pound dumbbells, and then next thing you know, after their RDLs, they go straight up into their shoulders. And it's just like, hold on, there's no way your legs are doing as much work as your shoulders. So one of those two are wrong.
Yeah, I'll ask people that sometimes too. Like, you know, it's like you're telling me right now that your legs are equal strength to, you know, whatever this shoulder thing is. There's just no way, right? So yeah, building off of what you said there, like I told somebody yesterday, I was like, I had noticed that his overhead mobility wasn't quite there. You know, when the classic, let's just take a single arm overhead dumbbell press, pressing up looks good, and then it travels super forward, right? Drifting forward, and now the dumbbell is 5 to 6 inches out in front of their face, and that 15 now feels like a 25 because it's not directly above you. I said, we're going to drop this weight. He was using a 25. I said, we're going to drop this weight to a 12.5 pound dumbbell. I was like, this is not an ego lift situation. Like, throw that out the window. I would rather you do 12.5 pounds for the next 4 weeks and get the dumbbell straight up over your head than even increase this by 1 pound. I was like, I would much rather see your range of motion be your focus than trying to push the gym up over your head. Because there's just, what's the reason? Like, when are we pushing overhead? I mean, if we do like a Simba move with your kid or something and like hold it up, like even then, like that's bad. That's not overhead mobility, you know? So it's like, yeah, understanding when to go heavy, when not to. And like you're saying, Tara, you can continue, but just not having to prioritize necessarily weight with overhead.
So clearly the motion is going to cause that if you're going too heavy. Another thing is just mobility, not having the mobility to get overhead.
Yeah.
That in itself is going to cause a problem because now we're trying to lift too heavy. Now you're pressing wrong, and too heavy, not in the right position. That's perfect equation for injury.
Yeah. Chain reaction to, you know, your scaps are not moving right, stress in the wrong areas, motor control's all bad.
Wrong muscles being used.
Right. It's a chain reaction. So, and then I always tell people when they're lifting too is like, just understand your shoulders are going to fatigue faster than anything else.
Yes.
Like, they are small muscles. It's a difficult movement. You already need to have good range of motion for it to be effective anyways. So start light, build on that, and then as you get more confident or you're able to get up there, then you can start to think about adding weight. But we add in to the programming a lot of overhead mobility, basically whenever we can, excuse me, and like overhead wall slides, things that can almost trick the brain into, because a lot of people have probably better mobility than they think overhead. It's just a matter of getting them into the correct position to be able to execute that.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Your excuse.
Common mistakes. Take it away.
I will. You just mentioned it. Starting position. Common mistake is a starting position. Where are you setting yourself up to begin the lift? If you're not starting correctly, your brain and muscle connection is already off. And then going forward with that, you're out of position.
And another common mistake, like we said earlier, grabbing way too heavy of a weight to get started, thinking it's just going to be nothing. And then next thing you know, you just see arch in the back, trying to get back, and that's basically just an incline bench press with no bench behind your back.
We don't want the improper setup to lead to a different injury.
Exercise.
Yeah, or a different exercise, period.
Yeah.
Like, you have to modify the load or the range before you start making all these bad compensations, because that, like you said, is the classic one, right? The big back in the arch, like the core tension's gone, you start to feel the low back compression. It's going to lead to other things. Those are Yeah, what you got?
I was going to say another thing. This isn't really a mistake, but it's more of a compensation that I see is when we have the overpress, having the arm in a 90-degree angle, pressing straight overhead.
Yeah.
Some people, we do have to adjust to a neutral position for them to be able to accomplish that. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's just more of the question of why is that reason so hard for you to get into that 90-degree motion? Because sometimes it can be so many different reasons. It could be an overactive muscle in your rhomboid for your scap. It could be something in the front that's just not liking it.
Yeah, unless your shoulder overhead mobility is just absolutely prime and optimal, you probably shouldn't be swinging all the way open to do a shoulder press. You should find it like it's you fall somewhere on the spectrum, and same thing with the angle of your press. Like you need to that's why we try to help you figure out what that is for you to get you closest to truly an overhead press. And yeah, it's a little bit different for everybody. So when we're like, I just talked a little bit about mixing in exercises or mostly myofascial release and stuff like that, mobility during the workout, the warm-up is huge. So you have to, we've did a while back actually a podcast on the importance of a warm-up, but there's a synovial fluid that basically runs through your body, and it's used as like a neuron or a neural activator for your muscles. So we need to be doing things in warm-ups, and we do, that are going to activate those stabilizers that you were talking about earlier, because they're not always addressed directly in a lift or in exercise. So a lot of times we'll do things like scapular retraction, protraction. You're down on the ground, you're pinching your shoulder blades and getting like the correct and appropriate movement in the scap, and almost like a muscle memory thing, trying to implant that feeling into your brain, hoping that it then correlates when you run into whatever the exercise is later on in the workout. Internal and external rotation, you can do this at different angles. So you can do it down at your sides, like if you were to make 90 degrees at your elbows and swing basically your arms open and closed, that's internal, external rotation. You could come up and do, like the field goal is good position, and we can do it that way up high. Being able to internally and externally rotate, that's addressing more of those stabilizers. And all of this, usually no resistance, right? You can resist it with bands, very light bands. It's hard to do with a heavy band. You're going to compensate somewhere if you do it with a heavy band, like it's not going to be good. But even just the mobility itself at free body weight is super important. As far as when you're choosing the correct, like when you're going through, you've warmed up and you're going through your workout now, we talk about pushing and pulling patterns. And like yesterday, for example, we just started a hypertrophy phase yesterday. We had upper body all workout. The whole thing was upper, but we did both pushing and pulling in the same day. So understanding the ratio between what kind of weight you should be able to push versus you should be able to pull is also important to understand. It's a pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio. Usually can pull a little bit more. So, keeping things like that in mind, not training through pain. We always have people, talk about that clicking and stuff. First question, does it hurt? If it's a yes, then we're stopping and modifying. If it's a no, then it's probably not an injury. We're just going to, again, prioritize range of motion and form over load. I know you guys use it. We talk about it with certain things because they're on the program specifically, but tempo, you talk about it with the knee a lot, eccentric.
Right.
How do you think that could correlate to the shoulder, you doing eccentric things?
I mean, it's the same concept. It's trying to promote blood flow to the area, right? So when you go explosive through the movement, going fast up, that's what you want, right? But when you're going down, we want to be able to control that movement so that way you can still have the stability aspect, as well as one of the exercises that we do yesterday, the alternating overhead press.
Yep.
A lot of people have the common mistake of having them both start down and they want to press one up at a time. No, we want you to have both up so that way you are having the stability throughout the whole entire motion.
Yep.
So that way we can promote blood flow as well as strength for those stability muscles and those primary muscles that we don't think about.
I know y'all heard that in his voice. He That was
Very
the 10,000th time you said that in the last 24 hours. That's good though.
Yes.
All right. So I think we're pretty good there. Just some of the exercises that we like to throw in. You were just talking about the overhead press. We're going to start to see trying to put in a lot more face pulls because, you know, a lot of the shoulder stuff is correlated to posture and, you know, people's C-spines and things like that being very hunched over, that kyphosis, that forward curve in the spine. That's where a lot of tension and things can be built up, and hyperactive muscles and stabilizers are built up. So you're going to see us trying to open up the upper body a lot more. That's what this shoulder program is going to have. Essentially, it's going to be not necessarily that your shoulder is hurt, but if we see it as a problem area or an area for you that you should definitely try to improve on, we might throw you into that to basically just, you know, address a weakness. Because, you know, maybe you're great with everything else, but your overhead is let's be honest, just trash. Like we're gonna go in and fix it, and a lot of that has to do with opening up the upper body. A lot of carries, things like we do a lot of farmers carries and things down low to our sides, but bringing it up high to, you know, waiters carries are up at about 90 degrees shoulder height. Moving then to like a total all the way up, whatever range of motion you can get, high-low carry with something straight up above your head. Things that are going to challenge the stability of the shoulder, because that's why it's so often injured / bothersome. Is it's not like I can go and do a bicep curl and be like, I'm working out my bicep, I'm exercising my bicep. There's so many things that the shoulders contribute to that kind of go unnoticed, like you were saying earlier. So excited about this shoulder program that's going to be coming up soon. And then, you know, just keep those things, go back and listen, prioritize some of the stuff we've talked about as we're working through our hypertrophy phase, and healthy shoulders forever. See you guys next week.
Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.